Okay, since I have now returned your CTEs for week 9, the secondary analysis of whatever secondary source you chose to do that you'll be using on your final project, I wanted to go over both how I graded it and what you really need to have in it, because this obviously feeds to what you need to be doing with your annotated bibliography as well. So a lot of you either ignored some of the questions or ignored some of the things that I had in there, like the please quote it and give the proper internal citation for it with the page number. A lot of that was ignored, and that really kind of annoys me. For those of you who have looked at the comments I made, you'll probably notice that for many of you, I literally looked up the document or the book or whatever you were working with and kind of fleshed in some of the points for you, particularly with the quotes for the thesis. The thesis can be difficult to figure out. In fact, actually, I often find that I have to read something 2 or 3 times to figure out exactly what the author is looking to prove, because that's what you're looking for. Some things, particularly book chapters, can be very long, and it's only towards the end that you begin to see what the thesis is, what they're trying to prove. With books, in some ways, it's often easier because they'll actually lay out for you a summary of what's going on in the chapters that'll be coming after the introduction. But the thesis is always in the introduction somewhere, and usually it's in there twice, even though it may be phrased differently each time. Normally, it's somewhere near the beginning, even though often, not always, but often, a writer builds to it so that it can be located 3 or 4 pages in to the document. And it's usually repeated somewhere again in the last couple of paragraphs of the introduction, or if there's not an introduction, in the first chapter. And this is the thesis for the entire book, not just for that particular chapter, which I think is what a lot of people get confused with as well. Often essays or academic articles are easier to locate the thesis because it has to be more succinct, because the work itself is more succinct, right? All right, so here's how I graded this. I gave 10 points for the author's thesis. And again, as long as you gave me a full citation where I could go get whatever it was you were reading, I could also find the thesis for you. And for some of you, if you got close to it, I gave you an 8 or a 9. But that also assumed that you quoted it. If you didn't quote the thesis, as it says here exactly, please quote it and give the proper internal citation for it with the page number. If you didn't do that, then the best you were going to get was a 6. All right. Most of you did pretty well finding the primary sources, and most historical documents have a tremendous lot of primary sources. If you've been using either of the books that I have required for you in the course, if you're in World Civ, then it's either Lepore, if you're in World Civ, it's either Harari or Frankopan. If you're in U.S. history, it's Lepore. Then there are multiple primary sources on every page, I kid you not. Both Lepore, Frankopan particularly, open up their chapters often with quotes from somebody on the ground, literally living in the time period they're talking about. They both love to give you quotes from letters, to give you quotes from documents written by people. So those things are all over the place. Where people began to have trouble with the primary source was confusing whether the author was actually using it or just referring to it. They really, to be called a primary source that they're using, they need to quote from it in some capacity or specifically reference it with a specific thing from it. With that also, you needed to give me page numbers, and you needed to give me, where you found the use of that primary source. Where people had more trouble, though, was in number 3 on the secondary sources. A secondary source is often not identifiable in the text itself unless there's a footnote with it. And I'm going to show you here in just a second. Hang on a minute. So to give you an example of secondary sources, this is the introduction to a book written by Kathleen Duvall called On Native Ground, and it is a book about literally Europeans in the Western Hemisphere, particularly the French, but there's some Spanish and English in here as well, who were dealing with the Quapaws and other indigenous peoples who were living in the Louisiana area, both obviously 1673 before Jefferson bought it. So this is back during the colonial period. Duval is an expert. Her field is indigenous history, particularly with the Quapaw and the people of this time period and in this place. And as you can see, when she starts off here, you get to the definition of Algonquin, from Algonquin of the Mississippi River itself, which to the people speaking that language means the big river. She discusses here the Quebec merchant Louis Joliet, the Jesuit priest Jacques Marquet, and their handful of companions who are dealing with the Quapaw. And she's getting a lot of this information from, and I'm going to give you this little footnote. Now, the wonderful thing with Kindle, and this isn't a Kindle, and you'll find this actually in a lot of online web sources as well. These little footnote things, this is what is called a Chicago Manual Style citation with the numbers. If you click on it, it actually pulls up the footnote itself. And from this, you can see that this literally is a primary source, because this is from what are called the Jesuit Relations, which were records kept by the Jesuit missionaries during their explorations of the Western Hemisphere. And these were sent back to France because this particular group of Jesuits were French. They kept them for almost 200 years, 1610 to 1791. They are in, I think, 10 volumes still in Paris. They have now been translated. Reuben Goldthwaite's edition from 1896 to 1901 was also digitized, so that now they are available online as well if you want to see them. But these are primary source accounts from Jesuit missionaries in the Western Hemisphere who were dealing with the natives, right? All right, so that's a primary source. Go away. From that primary source, she's gathered much of this information. She's got these quotes in here that she uses, these other groups of peoples that are referenced in different places as well. Again, more primary source material from the Jesuit Relations themselves, a generalized map, and that map would effectively be a secondary source. It is one that was created to basically demonstrate where these were. This was not made at the time. This has been made later. In fact, I think it was actually made for this book. All right, so going along then, and here we're talking about, again, more explorations in this area. We get here to where this sentence, surrounded by rivals, the Quapaws had no access to the English and Dutch arms trade in the east or the Spanish posts in the west, and saw French visitors as their opportunity to shift local power relations in their favor. If you click on that, for this one, for various interpretations of Quapaw pre-17th century history, see discussion in Chapter 3, in which case you could go to Chapter 3 and see that footnote. But later on, she has other citations as well, and in fact you can also, well, here's one. Historian Richard White has labeled the colonial Great Lakes region a middle ground in which, because no Indians or Europeans could control their neighbors, all had to accommodate the others, together forging new shared meanings and practices, often based on creative misunderstandings that allowed Indians and Europeans to hide some of the more incompatible goals and intentions from each other. This literally is from Richard White's book, The Middle Ground, and he is an historian. Here you go. This is a secondary source. Quite often you have to actually go to the footnotes to identify your secondary sources. And she also points out another secondary source that discusses this, James H. Merrill's The Indians' New World, Catawbas and their neighbors from European contact through the era of removal. And again, that was in 89. White's book was 91. These are now actually both considered classic history books for indigenous studies for North America. So my point with secondary sources is that quite often you do have to go directly to your notes to figure out what they are. And if the source you're using doesn't have notes, that kind of is going to create a problem for you. You can also look at a bibliography or their list of works cited to see what kind of secondary sources there are. But you also want to be sure that you're giving me at least, again, 3 examples and proper internal citation for where they're referenced, where they're actually used in the work itself. Okay, for number 4, credible. Well, is this a credible source? See definition below. I wasn't joking around about this. Obviously, many of you did not look at that definition, because that definition doesn't just stop at the idea of whether this person is an expert in their field, whether it's published on an academic website, whether it's somebody's name is backing it up. It also talks about tone and consistency, as in, is the information consistent within itself? The definition also uses the word reliable, which many of you didn't address, because reliability and credibility are 2 different things. And to be credible, you have to be reliable. And a lot of people didn't look at that definition or address those points. And then the last one, which was worth 25, and I put the grading point scale over here. 25 points is on the author's bias, and what evidence do you have to support your assessment? How do you get evidence? Evidence are quotes. Evidence are quotes. When you're talking to me about the author's bias, if you don't give me quotes to support that, then you're not giving me any evidence. So a lot of people lost a lot of points on that. And that's one of the key things. In your annotated bibliographies, you have to look at the author's bias. And often you can see that bias laid out or connected to the thesis in some capacity. Often you can see it in the language that is used. I had a couple of people who did really good jobs of putting quotes in that demonstrated the use of what I call impact language or evocative language, words that are meant to get your attention or to create some sort of, or to indicate some sort of opinion. These are words that you should look for in the writing, because that again goes to bias or perspective. And again, I was looking for specifics. So the less specific you were in answering any of these questions, the lower your grade. The same rule will apply on the annotated bibliography. The less example you give me, the more vague your description is, the lower your grade's going to be on. I want specific details from your sources. I want you to show me why you think these things. I want you to show me where those sources were used, right? And what types of sources they are. All right, so with that in mind, I'm going to stop here. This is the CTE for week 9. Again, secondary source analysis of a source that you are using in your final project, hopefully. I encourage you, well, hopefully, if you're getting this far, you've already listened to me, but I encourage you to apply these ideas when you're doing your annotated bibliography, because that's 15% of your final grade. So it's nothing to mess around with, nothing to wait until the last minute to do. All right, if you have any questions about your grade on this or about the annotated bibliography, you can email me. Thank you.